We are live.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sage Turner, Chair of the Housing and Community Development Committee, and I'd like to welcome you to our September 19th remote meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually today. For those of you out there with us, welcome. To help our audience follow along, I'll be stating each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. To do so, you call 855-925-2801 and use meeting code 9791. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. For today's meeting, we will also have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call and comment live, you will use the same number, 855-925-2801 and meeting code 9791. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers will need to push *3 to enter the speaker queue. I'm going to do a roll call and introduce all committee members and staff. So if you could come off mute when I call your name and say a quick hello. Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Community and Economic Development Director Nikki Reed.
Good morning, and if I may, I wanted just to take a quick moment to introduce a new staff member that we have that is joining Community and Economic Development specifically. Deborah Johnson is a part of the Community Development Division led by Dennis Newbern. And so I just wanted to say hello to her, let her come off mute for a second, say hello to the team, and then we'll turn it back over to you, Chair.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Deborah, and welcome. It sounds like you might have a little echo. I'm not sure why, but welcome to the team. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and going back to our list, Homeless Strategy Division Manager Emily Ball.
Good morning.
Community Development Manager Dennis Newbern.
Good morning.
Community Development Analyst Laura Neer.
Good morning.
Affordable Housing Officer Sasha Bertinsky.
Good morning.
And do we have Janice, Senior Assistant City Attorney Janice Ashley with us today? I see you're on the list. Okay. All right. Let's get moving on our agenda. We have 4 items today, 5 items. So the first thing is approval of the August minutes. Did anyone have any changes or updates? And if not, may I get a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, and because we're virtual, we will always do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Aye.
Myself, Sage. Aye. Thank you. The minutes are approved. Moving quickly on to item number 2, we're going to get an update from Emily Ball on the continuum of care consolidation application. And Emily, if you could go ahead and kick us off. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. I am glad to be here with you all today. It is our busiest time of year. It's our annual continuum of care process, which is an important federal process in the world of ending homelessness. So glad to be here to talk with you about that. Next slide. Some key takeaways, as you know, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, provides a framework and funding to local communities to respond to homelessness through its Continuum of Care program, or COC. This is wonky federal terminology, but it's really important in the way that our community collaborates to effectively respond to homelessness. In our community, the Asheville Buncombe Continuum of Care is eligible to apply for about $2.1 million in this year's competition in federal funding. And as the Continuum of Care Governance Board, the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, or HIAC, is the decision-making body about which project applications are submitted for funding and in what priority order. So really trying to keep an eye on the ball in terms of what is most important in our community in responding to homelessness. At their September 12th meeting, HIAC did make those funding decisions, and the decisions made included submissions of 2 projects for the city of Asheville that total about $156,000. So staff are recommending approval of those applications and execution of grant agreements if those are awarded by HUD. And I'll talk more about that, of course. Based on recommendations that we received from the National Alliance to End Homelessness in January, we are currently in the midst of a restructure of our continuum of care, and I'll share an update about that as well. Next slide. So again, continuum of care overview. Because ending homelessness requires many independent organizations and systems to work together, HUD designed the continuum of care program to create a framework for collaboration, system development, and decision-making. There's no single entity that holds all of the pieces necessary in order to effectively respond to homelessness. So a continuum of care is a framework that creates a self-governing local planning body, so very similar to the Home Consortium, which I know you all are familiar with. Self-governing local planning body within a defined geographic area. That's just a way of organizing stakeholders to work together to develop a comprehensive system that responds to homelessness effectively. So that continuum of care should have clear goals and strategies that decrease the number of people who become homeless, shorten the length of time people experience homelessness, and then increase the number of people who exit homelessness. Should be critically evaluating that system's performance on an ongoing basis based on data, and should be strategically allocating resources through a transparent process to support programs that will most further the COC's adopted goals. Next slide. The continuum of care has three components. Again, this is federal design. So the first is a continuum of care membership, and that's a large body of stakeholders who are aligned with the goal of ending homelessness. So folks from across the community, whether they are service providers, community members who are concerned, advocates, wide variety of people in the continuum of care membership. In our community, that's not currently formalized. We do have a homeless coalition that's existed for many, many years that operates similarly to that continuum of care membership body, but not currently formalized. The continuum of care should be led by a board that governs the continuum of care, sets strategic direction and policy, and allocates resources. And that's currently the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, or HIAC. And then that board designates a continuum of care lead agency to provide strategic and administrative support. So that's the city of Asheville currently, and that's the role of our division here in the Homeless Strategy Division. And again, as you know, based on the recommendations that our community received from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, we have a governance work group under HIAC that is supported by technical assistance from HUD, working to develop a new governance charter that will formalize that continuum of care membership and will create a new continuum of care board outside of the city's board structure to promote community ownership. So we should have much more to share about that in the coming months, but I think that will really help clarify roles and responsibilities in our community and help us, again, identify, the continuum of care just is a strong framework for how we can work together most effectively to get the job done. Next slide. So again, strategic resource allocation is a role of the continuum of care, and the continuum of care structure makes our community eligible for annual federal funding to respond to homelessness. This year, eligible for about $2.1 million. At their September 12th meeting, HIAC approved all of the project applications to be included in our COC's submission for that $2.1 million. And that included 2 renewal projects for the city of Asheville as the lead agency, the designated lead agency for the continuum of care. So the first is the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS. This is a renewal grant of about $63,000. We primarily use this to contract with our HMIS vendor on behalf of the continuum of care rather than having agencies pay those licensing fees. So in other COCs, participating agencies sort of self-fund that access to HMIS in order to meet that requirement. In our community, traditionally, the city has held that grant in order to cover that cost for service providers. The second grant is a planning grant that is about $92,000, just under $93,000. That's non-competitive administrative funding that's only available to the lead agency, and that contributes to the salaries in our division here in the Homeless Strategy Division. Next slide. The next 2 slides are the full slate of project applications that HIAC approved at their September 12th meeting to be included in this year's submission. All of these are renewals of existing housing programs at HelpMate and Homeward Bound. And then additionally, both HelpMate and Homeward Bound have a new project application to expand capacity to house additional people. HelpMate's projects, of course, are specific to people who are survivors of domestic violence, and both of their projects, the renewal and the new, are rapid rehousing, meaning they are providing short-term financial assistance and supportive services to help people exit homelessness and access permanent housing. And then all of Homeward Bound's renewal projects are permanent supportive housing. So similarly providing financial assistance and supportive services, but for people who are exiting chronic homelessness and providing that support long-term. Chronic homelessness, as you know, are folks who have been homeless for at least 12 months and have a disability. So people who will need that support long-term in order to not return to homelessness. Next slide. And those are the remainder of the projects that were approved in the slate by HIAC at their September 12th meeting. You'll see in that left column that all of the projects are ranked. So one of the responsibilities of the Continuum of Care Board is to provide that priority order to HUD so that as HUD is making funding decisions, they understand what's most important to the local community. And then you'll also see that the planning grant renewal for the city is not ranked because, again, that's not competitive. It's not in competition with these other projects, but is just administrative funding. Next slide. Next steps on Continuum of Care funding. If approved by City Council at the September 26th meeting, then we will submit the HMIS and planning project applications by the submission deadline of September 28th, along with all of those other project applications approved by HIAC. HUD will make final determinations and they will announce awards in the spring and then initiate contracts for calendar year 2025 grant terms. And then additionally, as I mentioned, the Continuum of Care restructure is underway. So we have a governance work group of HIAC that has been working with HUD technical assistance. They presented a draft charter to HIAC at the September 12th meeting. They're asking for feedback from HIAC members in this 2-week period, and then they'll present an updated charter in October for consideration. We're working with HUD, again, technical assistance from HUD on a transition plan and timeline. So I don't have any details about that yet, but we'll be glad to share that as that comes together. And part of that restructure will include a newly formed Continuum of Care membership body to elect a new Continuum of Care board that would then replace HIAC as the Continuum of Care governance board. Next slide. Key takeaways again, this is our annual federal funding process eligible for just over $2 million, which includes 2 projects for the city of Asheville that both support our overall community efforts in the Continuum of Care. And we do have that Continuum of Care restructure under development. Next slide. Okay. So we are recommending that we do submit these planning and HMIS grant applications as part of the Continuum of Care competition and then accept any funds are awarded. And that is it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Emily. I know I have a couple. Councilwoman, do you have any questions for Emily? Go ahead, Antoinette. You're muted, hon.
Can you go back a few slides to where you discuss a reconstituted advisory board? And then it said something like a board will elect, I think maybe it's about 3 slides ago.
And FYI, the slide presentation is not available via the link. It's coming up as requesting permission to view it. So if someone could free that up, it'd help too.
But I'll go ahead and ask the question I'm thinking of. In order for someone to be considered for that, does that person already have to be serving on HIAC?
No. To be considered for the new Continuum of Care board?
Yes. Is that
No.
going to go, any of that, will that come through boards and commissions?
No. So this will be creating a self-governing board in the community that will remove the Continuum of Care governance function that HIAC currently holds. It will pull that out of the city's boards and commissions structure and seed it with ownership with this new Continuum of Care board.
So how does one who's not currently part of HIAC become a part of this reconstituted board? You said it's elected but I'm just curious because I'd spoken to someone who's expressed interest in our overarching process.
Yeah. I don't know yet is the honest answer. So that draft charter that HIAC reviewed at their September 12th meeting does prescribe a very clear process for how people within the continuum of care membership can then submit, apply to be a board member and be elected by that continuum of care membership body. The part that I don't know yet is what our transition plan will look like and what the timeline will look like for standing up that new board. So we'll have much more detail to share about all of this as it gets further along. And all of that will certainly be very, public and communicated to the community.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel, did you have something you wanted to add?
Sure. Just wanted to note that on November 16th, we are planning on having a follow-up joint work session with the county to talk about next steps and the progress that the different HIAC working groups have made in response to those National Alliance to End Homelessness recommendations. And of course, as Emily already mentioned, their top recommendation was reconstituting our continuum of care governance structure. And so I imagine while we have not yet finalized the agenda for that November 16th session, that a lot of the conversation will be centered around revisions to that governance structure. So just wanted to raise some awareness that we are going to have a really detailed conversation specific to revisions to the governance structure with both the county commission and city council at that November 16th work session.
That's great. It's hard to believe November is coming up. I had a couple just basic questions because I am not as knowledgeable as some folks on the COC. I've never been on HIAC and I try and keep up, but I would love to just ask a couple questions while we have you, Emily, because it's wonderful to have you here, by the way. The COC money, so the 2.1 million roughly, does that number change every year and what makes it fluctuate?
Great question. So HUD tells us every year how much we're eligible to apply for. In general, that's based on renewals of our existing projects, and those renewals do account for increases in fair market rent. So many of the grants that we have are rental assistance grants, and so that is factored in. But HUD also tells us what we are eligible to apply for in bonus funding. And, I said that both Helpmate and Homeward Bound have applied for new projects this year. If those new projects are awarded, then they become renewal projects in the subsequent year. And so that pot of money snowballs over time.
Wow.
Whether or not the full amount is awarded is based on the overall performance of our continuum of care, meaning not only how effective these particular projects are, but how good we are as a community and as a homeless service system at delivering outcomes. And that's based on data collected in HMIS. We submit reports every year about our system performance measures, et cetera. So very much, rising tide lifts all ships. The better we are at ending homelessness together as a community, the more federal resources we're able to access.
That's amazing. Thank you for that explanation. Could we go back to the slides where I think there were two, it was showing the allocations recommended by HIAC. I was surprised at how many are on here for Homeward Bound, and they all have this permanent supportive indicator. So could you explain to me so I just am not sure. They all say PSH of some level, and it's like $1.5 million. So these are all renewal. This has been happening. These are programs that we're just renewing, but what are they doing related to permanent supportive housing? Is this them putting folks in the community, or is this them putting folks at Days Inn?
It's not related to Days Inn. For the most part, almost everyone who will be at Compass Point Village will be using a housing choice voucher through the Housing Authority. So different source of subsidy to pay the rent for those folks. Homeward Bound has 6 permanent supportive housing projects that have accumulated over time in that same process I was describing a minute ago. And those 6 projects are all supporting folks who are living out in scattered site housing with private landlords out in the community. The rental assistance, or the project here, is paying for both the rental assistance and the case management support.
Wow. Okay. That's very helpful. Did not realize all that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mostly programs and rent, not capital. So that's really helpful. Okay.
It's not capital at all. Yep. It's all rental assistance and case management.
Fascinating. I appreciate that. Any other questions for Emily while we have her? Okay, well, it's always nice to hear what HIAC is up to, and I hope as the COC develops, we'll maybe hear more at HCD. So we're just kind of in the loop of what's happening. Thank you for your time today, Emily, and all you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so that completes item number. Oh, we need a motion. I'm sorry. Let's make the motion. As council, would anyone like to make a motion?
I make a motion that City Council authorize the city manager to sign and submit the City of Asheville's Planning and Homeless Management Information System grant application in the fiscal year 2023 continuum of care competition and accept any funds awarded.
Second.
Okay, that competition word is interesting. I will do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Aye.
And myself, aye. So this will move forward to council with a recommendation from HCD. Thank you, everyone. And that concludes item number 2 on our agenda. And we're moving to item number 3, which is an amendment to the HUD consolidated plan. And I believe Laura is going to kick this one off for us. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Neer. I'm a community development analyst in the community development division. And I will be talking to you today about using CDBG funds outside of city limits, specifically for HelpMate. And I also have them here today to field any programmatic questions you guys might have. Let me go to the next slide. So key takeaways: in May 2021, City Council approved the fiscal year 21-22 annual action plan, which granted HelpMate $49,241 in community development block grant housing services funds, which the agency is currently spending down. The CDBG Housing Services Program provides support to survivors of domestic violence that receive home tenant-based rental assistance. The council approved 5-year 2020-2024 consolidated plan does not currently allow for CDBG funds to be used on activities that occur outside of city limits, even those used in conjunction with home TBRA funds. The consolidated plan does allow home TBRA funds to be used outside of city limits, though. HelpMate identified the requirement that CDBG housing services funds only be used within City of Asheville limits as a limitation to providing services to their clients. To overcome this limitation, staff recommends amending the 2020-2024 consolidated plan to allow HelpMate to spend CDBG housing services funds in both Asheville and Buncombe County. Next slide. So this is just a little bit about HelpMate CDBG housing services funds and some of the issues they're facing. CDBG housing services funds are used in the housing case management for domestic violence survivors and are for the purpose of rehousing domestic violence survivors who are homeless because they are fleeing abuse. Funds provide ongoing case management in conjunction with home TBRA funds. Affordable housing options are harder to find in city limits than in other parts of Buncombe County. As a result, 20% of survivors who have been housed by HelpMate under the home program were unable to locate housing within city limits, which resulted in HelpMate being unable to access CDBG funding to offer ongoing case management for survivors. Additionally, rental rates within the City of Asheville are significantly higher than in other parts of Buncombe County, making it more difficult for survivors to be able to assume payment of their full rental cost after their period of rental assistance has ended. Survivors of domestic violence require more choice regarding their housing placement to ensure their ongoing safety. Making options available that are outside of City of Asheville limits for these survivors allows them to better consider their safety needs and housing options from a greater pool of potential placements. Next slide. So staff recommends allowing HelpMate to use CDBG funds outside of city limits, but not outside of Buncombe County for housing case management purposes. And this would be as an amendment to the 2020-2024 consolidated plan. This proposal would not impact requirements for other CDBG funded projects and programs. Next slide. And this is just the key takeaways. They have some funding, about $50,000 in CDBG housing services funds that were allocated for the fiscal year 21-22. CDBG funds can currently not be used outside of city limits, as we stated in the consolidated plan. And we're suggesting that we amend the consolidated plan to allow CDBG funds to be used outside of city limits. Next slide. And that's the suggested motion. Do you guys have any questions for either me, Dennis, or Helpmate?
Councilwoman, any questions? I have one. What we're doing here, so I get it. Rental rates are so high in our community that when Helpmate is in need of housing someone and can't find a local that will work, they can go farther out and find something more rural. Makes a lot of sense to me. On its face, this is awesome. Does this allow any organization to do this, or is this specific to Helpmate?
Specifically, it's just going to be for Helpmate at this moment, but going forward, the plan at this point is to let other agencies on a case-by-case basis to do this. So obviously, Helpmate is at the top priority for this because survivors face, they face a lot more issues than the other homeless population. So,
okay, wonderful. Thank you, Laura. Councilwoman, if you have questions, now's the chance. And if not, I'm happy to entertain a motion.
I'm prepared to make the motion.
Go for it.
I move to recommend that the Asheville City Council approve an amendment to the 2020 through 2024 consolidated plan allowing CDBG funding to be used outside the jurisdictional limits of the city of Asheville, but within Buncombe County for Helpmate Incorporated, and authorize the city manager to sign all necessary documents to this effect.
Second.
Okay, and we'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Mosley?
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith?
Aye.
Myself, aye. All right, that will also move forward to council. And April, I see you here. Thank you for being here. It looks like we don't have any questions for you, but if you had anything to share, this could be your moment.
Thank you so much. I just appreciate this committee's support. Mr. Newbern and his department have been wonderful to work with. Laura has done a great job in communicating well with us about this. This will help us better align our use of CDBG and home funds and hopefully provide better wraparound support to the survivors that we're serving under those programs. I'm grateful to each of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, April, and thanks for all you're doing. We appreciate it. Okay, that concludes item number 3 on our agenda, and we're moving on to item number 4. That is an update on the Affordable Housing Plan. Very exciting, from Sasha Bertinsky.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, council members. I'm here to give you a quick update on the Affordable Housing Plan. Next, Katie. A few key takeaways. First, we're creating a new affordable housing plan, which will engage our community in a comprehensive and coordinated way to help determine the future of our affordable housing programming. It's going to assist us in leveraging our tools to achieve the maximum benefit for our community and inform a potential future affordable housing bond. And through a competitive selection process, we selected Enterprise Community Partners as our consultant for the plan. They began work on August 28th, and the plan will be developed over the next 10 months. Next. So just as a reminder, I think all of you know that, but also for the community, this plan is going to assess our current needs and set a direction for the next 5 to 10 years. It will involve residents most affected by the housing crisis and address community priorities. It's also going to look at our city tools and assess them and see if there's gaps, recommendations for changes, and those tools include the Land Use Incentive Grant, Housing Trust Fund, and our city-owned land for affordable housing program. And this, again, will provide a foundation for us to decide how we want to allocate, funds for a future affordable housing bond referendum. So the plan will actually make recommendations for a potential bond. Next. So just really quickly, we have an internal project team. I'm the project manager, and I've got support from many different departments. My own department, city manager's office, finance, planning and urban design, equity and inclusion department, the Office of Data and Performance, which is in the finance department, and our legal department as well. And development services is also a part of our team. Next. So here's something different we're going to try with this plan. Often when we do plans, we develop an advisory committee. And we do run into some typical problems with those committees. So we're going to try something different. So we are going to have a resident engagement roundtable, and the focus of this roundtable is really going to help our consultant team and staff inform the outreach for this plan. And those folks will serve as ambassadors for the plan. The makeup of that roundtable will be primarily residents and people who are most impacted by the affordable housing crisis. I would imagine there's also probably some agency representatives who work with folks kind of at that grassroots level who are facing issues as well. Then we also have our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, AHAC, and they will be involved throughout the plan development process. They are our policy advisory committee for affordable housing, and they will help implement the plan once it's been completed and adopted by council. And then, of course, this committee, we will be making sure that you're in the loop the entire way throughout this planning process. Next. So this is just really quickly, this is our picture of our team that's from Enterprise. We're really excited to be working with them. They are a national nonprofit, and they've been working in affordable housing for over 40 years. And they have branches, you know, this is their consulting branch, but they do lots of real estate deals for affordable housing and community development activities as well. So they have access to a lot of expertise and experience. Gerard Smith is our project manager, and he will be here in just a couple of weeks. So this is kind of the overall scope broken into tasks. Next. And then we provided just a quick timeline. We've started meeting with them regularly. Engagement will really begin fully in October and continue through the process. They will be doing a housing needs assessment, updating our numbers from the Bowen report, what we call the Bowen report, on the front end. Next. And then assessing our tools and the visits. Gerard Smith will be here in 2 weeks, as I said, kind of a lay of the land visit. He'll be doing some interviews with some folks. And then either late October or early November, before the holidays, our plan is to do a much bigger, robust community engagement visit and really hear from folks in the community. And then they will come back in March. They will be doing meetings throughout this time, but it'll be more virtual. But they will come back in March with a team and kind of bring draft recommendations and really vet those with the community again. And then coming back in May to present to City Council. Next. So just right now, what's happening in the immediate time frame, we're meeting with them weekly. As I said, they'll be here in 2 weeks, the first week of October. When they're here in October, they have a specific exercise that they do, a stakeholder mapping exercise that they will do with staff. And I'm inviting county staff as well for folks who, how do we get the broadest representation on this roundtable as possible? And then in the next couple of weeks, we're establishing a web presence and beginning an initial awareness campaign. And then also you will be receiving a message maybe today, inviting you all to meet with our consultant when he's here probably on Wednesday, October 4th. He's coming in late or Tuesday and leaving not too long after the AHAC meeting. So he'll actually be able to be at the AHAC meeting on Thursday morning. So next. I think that's pretty much it. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions or comments.
Councilwoman, any questions or comments? I just have some general enthusiasm. I know this is a huge undertaking. It's really helpful to see the timeline too, and to know we might see some data by the end of this year, and that really by this time next year, we will be complete and operating under this new plan. And it's wonderful. Sasha, I appreciate you taking this on. I know you'll do a great job I'm curious about the new input method. Be great to hear how that goes as you move forward. But.
Right, and we have set a budget aside in our, or there is part of our budget for stipends for folks who are really helping us get the words out and
oh, great.
Get the word out, not the words, get the word out.
That's wonderful. Okay. I don't think we need any action on this. It's more just information sharing. So if there are no other questions from colleagues, then we will continue to move on the agenda. Thank you, Sasha. So that completes item number 4, and we're on to the last item on our agenda, which is the committee work plan. And I think Rachel is going to have an update on this.
That's correct. And as Katie is pulling up the presentation, I just want to take a quick moment to thank this committee. Your willingness to try something new last year has resulted in us creating a model that we've been able to replicate with all 6 of our council committees and continue to make process improvements as a result of that groundwork that this group, in partnership with the Community and Economic Development Department, as well as the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, put in last year. So just want to say thank you for creating this model. We, of course, are going to continue to tweak it, want to make sure that we're meeting this committee's needs, make sure the advisory board's needs are being met, and then also make sure that we're creating a clear roadmap for staff to make sure that we're reporting at the right times on the progress we're making for the projects that we're working on that ultimately will help realize your strategic priority goals. So just wanted to say a resounding thank you and welcome continued feedback as we continue to make this process more effective for the community. Next slide, please, Katie. So key takeaways, our annual work plans really serve as a tool to plan for and better organize the work that occurs at the council committee level. Committee work plans, of course, are informed by several different strategic planning elements that we have in the city, including the City Council's Vision 2036 framework, your annual strategic priorities and the goal statements, which are a new element that came in with FY 2024, as well as the committee scopes of work. Committee work plans include a combination of ongoing and administrative items, along with policy considerations that include specific assignments from time to time that go directly to advisory boards and other committees for their feedback and then report back to the committee level. City Council committee work plans are intended to be dynamic living documents that we know will evolve throughout the fiscal year, but they serve as an overall guide for council committees, staff, and advisory board members throughout the fiscal year to provide some level of predictability as we plan for those projects and initiatives that are tied to your strategic priorities. Next slide, please. So quick reminder, and of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but just noting those strategic planning elements that are most closely aligned with the scope of work for the Housing and Community Development Committee. Under the Vision 2036 framework, we have quality, affordable housing. Then part of your strategic priorities that were adopted again with the start of this fiscal year, we've got equitable and affordable housing and stability, as well as houselessness strategies. And then I mentioned the new strategic planning element that came about at the start of this fiscal year. That was the adoption of strategic priority goal statements. So the 2 strategic priority goal statements that are most closely aligned with the scope of work for this committee include equitable and affordable housing stability's goal statement, which is maximize tools, plans, and regulations to increase housing supply, prioritize access for low-income residents and households, reduce barriers to construction, and begin preparing to update the Unified Development Ordinance and initiating a 2024 housing bond. And then the strategic priority goal statement for houselessness strategies, which is make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring by supporting the implementation of National Alliance to End Homelessness recommendations. So that's the alignment to those broader policy goals that we have heard and received from the City Council. Next slide, please, Katie. So as a quick reminder, back in November, the City Council adopted formal scopes of work for each of the council committees. And the intent is moving forward at each of your retreats to not only have a review of your strategic priorities and your strategic priority goal statements, but to make sure that the council committees remain aligned with your priority direction for the organization. If you recall, last year, we actually revised the structure of council committees to ensure that they were more closely aligned with your strategic priorities. And we want to make sure on an annual basis that we're just having that checkpoint that as things do evolve in our community, that the council committee structure remains aligned with those key priorities that City Council has set forth. So at this point, the Housing and Community Development Committee's scope of work includes reviewing policy updates and making policy recommendations to enhance the quality of life in Asheville and livability of neighborhoods on all matters relating to the creation and maintenance of housing within the city, including public housing and affordable private housing. Also, to review policy matters relating to solving homelessness and the provision of services to unhoused individuals within the city. And then third, overseeing the city's investments in federal housing and urban development funding programs to address a wide range of community development needs. And so you noted today, we have not typically had updates from Emily Ball or members of the HIAC committee on the work that they are doing. And because of the specificity, and thank you to the City Council for adopting these scopes of work, we now have clarity on the types of items that need to be brought forward to council committees. So one of the things I've been working with the Community and Economic Development Department on, and you'll see this reflected in your draft work plan, is making sure that we do have more intentional touch points on the work of the continuum of care, as well as broader homelessness strategies, so that this committee receives those regular updates, just like you do related to affordable housing work. Next slide, please. So key policy topic areas for this committee include housing affordability and supply, housing incentives, homelessness, and then as previously mentioned, the HUD funding, primarily CDBG and home investments. Next slide, please. Again, as I referenced at the beginning with my opening comments, thank you to this committee for really helping us work through how do we have those meaningful intersections with our city council advisory boards and other working groups. And so Sasha already mentioned the work that the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, for example, is going to be doing on the Affordable Housing Plan update. And then, as I previously mentioned, we want to make sure that we've got more intersectionality with the City Council through the Housing and Community Development Committee and our HIAC Continuum of Care Board, as well as our Asheville Regional Housing Consortium. Next slide, please. So in terms of the draft work plan, of course, this is intended to be dynamic. So the Community and Economic Development team, in partnership with other departments in the city manager's office, have really mapped out between now and January 2024 on what those specific agenda items are going to be. And then as we start to move into the spring, we have ideas on when items are going to go, but we don't have those as specifically as fleshed out as we do for the next few months. And so I'm going to highlight after this slide what a couple of those items are. Primarily, those items are going to be more administrative in nature. And then as things start to progress, both with the continuum of care as well as with the affordable housing plan update, we'll be able to get more specific on when we will come back to you with updates on those projects and seek feedback from you all. So for our next committee meeting, we've got a code, oh, I'm sorry, Kate, if you can go back. We've got a Code Purple update, which you'll be receiving from Emily Ball. And then seeking this committee's feedback on a specific land use incentive grant application for 115 Fairview. Currently slated in November, and we are working on identifying an alternate meeting date. November 21st is the same week as Thanksgiving, and so I believe Katie is working with you all to try to find another time in November that we can meet. But we do have some pretty robust agenda items that are tied primarily to our HUD funding application process, getting some updates on those CDBG and home applications just so that you all are aware of that application cycle that's really going to gear up later this winter and early spring. You'll receive some updates from Sasha on the Housing Trust Fund application process. And then depending on how far along we're able to get with our consultant on the Affordable Housing Plan update, potentially receiving some policy adjustment considerations on both the Housing Trust Fund as well as land use incentive grant policy. Moving into December, while it is only one item, it is a very robust agenda item, and that is an update from the Community and Economic Development team on the prioritization of city-owned property. This is a large effort that Nikki's team is leading, which will travel to both the Housing and Community Development Committee as well as the Planning and Economic Development Committee, looking at how do we ultimately prioritize and maximize the use of our unoccupied city-owned properties. Part of that discussion will include considerations on potential tourism development agency funding opportunities, particularly as it pertains to their openness to funding affordable housing projects moving forward through their LIFT funding cycle application. And then in January, as we've already discussed today, we will likely receive some specific updates on that new continuum of care governance structure, which of course we will have a really targeted specific discussion around where we are in the implementation of our National Alliance to End Homelessness recommendations at the joint city-county work session in November. And so the hope would be by January, we've worked out any of the loose ends associated with that governance structure and would move from this committee ultimately to full city council for consideration and potential adoption of that revised structure. Next slide. So mentioned we have in the spring several items that are somewhat routine, you see every year. So while we don't have specific dates identified yet, we know that in the spring, this is when you're going to be considering applications and ultimately approving allocations for both our community development block grant applicants, as well as the housing trust fund applicants. Next slide. So on this slide, we did receive some feedback from committee members on potential work plan items that we're kind of working through. How best do we as staff respond to those recommendations? So we did receive a request to receive an update on short-term rental regulations. And so staff is currently assessing potential ordinance revisions, and we're doing a bit of an environmental scan with other local governments to determine what potential ordinance revisions may be considered by some of our regional partners. And then we do plan on having a status update, and this may be ready as soon as October, on the enforcement efforts that staff has achieved, or the success of the contract that we have with Rentalscapes, who help monitor and ensure compliance with our existing short-term rental regulations. The other item that we are working through, and this has been an item that's been on the Planning and Urban Design Department's work plan for the last year and a half or so, is looking at the multifamily benefits table, similar to what we have for hotels. And because of the work that's happening with the missing middle housing study, as well as the affordable housing plan, in addition to us having a recent leadership turnover with the Planning and Urban Design Department Director, we are recommending that we wait a little bit on pursuing that potential benefits table. But in the meantime, staff is committed to concurrent with the development of the affordable housing plan, as well as missing middle housing study, looking at how do we improve the buy right process for multifamily projects, so that if they meet specific zoning and design affordability standards, they may not have to go through the conditional zoning process and could be approved by right. So a way to improve some efficiency in the meantime, as we're working on those broader missing middle and affordable housing plan update processes. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, of course, today, and I have the wrong date on there, today is September 19th, not September 13th. We are seeking feedback on work plan items. Then in October, we will provide updates to advisory boards regarding any policy items that are going to be referred to them. Namely, I know Sasha is going to be working with the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee regarding their role in the Affordable Housing Plan update, and then specifically policy review items associated with the Housing Trust Fund policy and Land Use Incentive Grant policy. Any feedback we receive from you today regarding things you want to see added or changed to our work plan will be presented to you at your October 17th meeting. And then as needed, we will have updates from advisory board members. We also want you to have annual report updates from advisory boards, namely HIAC, as well as the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. We will review planned agenda items with you as necessary. And we do also put future planned agenda items on your agenda so that you can look a few months out and see what we have slated. And then annually, as I already mentioned, receiving those reports and having that direct feedback from your advisory board members. Next slide. And this is just recapping those key takeaways, and your work plans are intended to be dynamic and living. We want to have ongoing dialogue about slated items for future agendas with you throughout the year, and they serve as a guide for not only the committees, but also for staff and advisory board members to help us make sure that we are ultimately achieving your priority goals throughout the fiscal year. And with that, Katie, you can take down the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions and definitely want feedback from you.
Thank you, Rachel. And I saw Janice joined us. I'm not sure if she has something to add, but Councilwoman, do you have anything to add or suggest for work plan items? Or any questions about what was just shared?
I don't have a question about what was just shared, but and I don't know if this is the right place for it, but maybe you can help me determine where the right place for it is. I've long wondered whether some of our policies that require certain percentages of affordability, if it's possible that they unintentionally could lead to an increase in actual market rates. Are people following me when I say that?
I am. Mm-hmm.
Where would that discussion or review go? Where's the appropriate place to consider that?
It seems like here, as Sasha guides us through those policy updates later this year, that would probably be the first review because it would come to us.
I missed the very beginning of your statement, and I'm sorry.
Well, I'll give you like an example, and maybe this will make it clearer. Say, for instance, we have a developer who comes to us and we go the regular 80-20 route and making up numbers. Say if at that point market rate is $1,000, but they decide to do 20% at, again, making up a number, 800. I wonder if in order to break even, instead of having all units at 1,000, if they decide then to go up to 1,100 per unit, I'm wondering if our policy of 80% AMI actually inadvertently could lead to an increase in market rate apartments. Did that muddy it even more?
No, that makes sense. And I remember, I think you making that comment before. So I think that's something our consultants could look at for sure. And how do we shape our policy around, to help or address that concern? I think what's coming this fall is a very limited policy adjustment. It's not an overhaul of the entire policies. AHEC wants to look at the scoring of the Housing Trust Fund and Luigi, and it's not, so it's limited scope before the end of the year for policy adjustments. But we could definitely have our consultant look at that for Luigi, and I do think, kind of to Rachel's point, they know that we'll be discussing these things and are wanting to kind of be ready to be there as a resource for all these discussions and help with that.
I'd like to add a layer to that of concern because I appreciate what Councilwoman Mosley is adding. I have a similar concern, and what I'm thinking, and I of course don't have data on this, is this might be impacting some of our workforce, because if you're either making enough to receive this incentivized unit, but then to your point, the other market rate units are just going higher, and there's a gap. The 80 to 120 AMI, which is what Luigi used to have programmed for is gone. So I just wonder if we're creating a gap, almost in effect, making some of these workforce units or rents that might be at 90% forced to pay 130 because the market rate is pushed higher. So somehow if we could dig into that and understand if we're making it harder for workforce to find units, it would be helpful. It's just a concern in general. Go ahead, Antoinette.
And I also have another request that's not related to the work plan, but I thought that the presentation that Thrive gave us, was it last meeting? I thought it would be beneficial if the full council could see that same presentation. I was wondering if that is something that could be discussed with the city manager's office.
I agree.
Mayor, to have it come before the full council.
I was going to bring up whether or not, as we look at our work plan, if we need to discuss, during that meeting, I asked Thrive specifically if they were interested in continuing to do this performance analysis. And I just wonder if that's something we need to have on our horizon too. It wouldn't be soon. It'd obviously be after we implement new policies, but getting that result data was really helpful. Okay, well, I'm really glad to see all of these work plan items. I know council members have been weighing in on some, so it's really wonderful to see them on the work plan, particularly around short-term rentals, something I'm working on right now. And colleagues, just so you know, I'm kind of creating a draft document of the questions I have around it. And if you have any that you would like to add, let me know or reach out. That conversation is still building, but very important one, I think, right now. Any other questions or comments for Sasha about our work planning? I know we're asking y'all to take on a lot. We really appreciate it, though. Some of these things are crucial to livability in Asheville. Okay, that concludes item number 5 on our agenda, which leaves us with item number 6, which is public comment. Katie, do we have anyone that has called in with questions?
One moment, let me reload the site and double check. No, we do not.
Okay, great. Then we have completed our agenda today in record time. It's only 11. Thank you everyone for your time and energy, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.